Is Ashtanga Yoga a cult? And yes, I am doing this right now because I have taken all the Yogadelics. I took all the Ashtangadelics and went fully into my right brain. And now I am back to speak truth from an objective point of view about what is actually happening in the Ashtanga Vinyasa system. And no, we are not talking about Patanjali today and his system of Ashtanga, but rather Patabi Joyce's evolved system of Ashtanga Yoga. And so I do not want to use a definition of cult that will make it easy for me to umbrella Ashtanga Vinyasa beneath it, because there are some definitions of cults out there that enable us to define the public school system, the police force, the military, corporate workforces as cults. And so I would rather not get too flimsy with my definition here. And so let us get the textbook definition of cult or a cult. Cult is a term often applied to new religious movements and other social groups which have unusual and often extreme religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. Extreme devotion to a particular person, object, or goal is another characteristic often ascribed to cults. So many of you guys watching right now are hopefully detached enough to see that the worship of Patabi Joyce and Sharat Joyce absolutely meets these standards, especially when we add in the physical and spiritual elements into it. But if you are watching this channel, hopefully you aren't that brainwashed. And if you are, don't worry, I will talk to you later in this video. But I would rather like to speak to the solo Ashtangis, the Ashtangis who aren't practicing under authorized teachers and are still holding on to this axiomatic idea that Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga is magic. Because guess what, you guys? I love the primary and intermediate series. When I go on vacation, or sometimes when I'm at work and I need to do something and I'm in a small and confined space and have an hour to kill, I can hit a primary series and it's absolutely refreshing. And the link between Bandha and breath and drishti, as I'm sure all you guys have experienced, is pretty magical. But there is a mythology surrounding Ashtanga that started with Patabi Joyce when he lied about the origins of Ashtanga, because all Patabi Joyce did was rip off some of Krishnamacharya's sequences and cater it to adolescent college students. And all Krishnamacharya did to invent his system of yoga is take some classical yoga techniques and mix those with Western gymnastic manuals and stuff that people in Britain were doing. And when you look at where they say that they got these sequences, including Krishnamacharya, it was passed down from the gods. If you look at the mythologizing of these sequences from day one, that is still present every single day when you step on the mat. Because there is such a thing as social reinforcement. Because when you got into Ashtanga Yoga, I had no idea what it was back in 2013 when I got into it. I went to this class called Yoga Therapy. And I did it and was obviously very hard. I was like, wow, this is cool. I'm going to come back again. Then it was later explained to me that I was doing something called Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga. And so I looked it up. I got Patabi Joyce's book, and suddenly I was sucked into this world. And even though I knew that those sequences didn't come from the gods, because it's such an intense set of poses linked together in a nonstop format, and I'm in a Western body that is very tight from sitting, of course I'm going to experience yogadelics with it. But what I learned from my yoga teacher, Simon Borg Olivier, is that most people, when they are doing Ashtanga Yoga, and when I mean most, almost all of you guys, are kicking off a sympathetic nervous system response that gives you that good feeling and isn't actually a positive for the body, especially when you do it for 6 days of the week, because what you're actually doing in Ashtanga Yoga is passive eccentric and concentric holds with isometric contractions to full extension 6 days a week in all the same poses. And when you enter a sympathetic nervous state, you actually become more hypersuggestible. And this leads me back to the original definition of cult, that a social group that has extreme rituals. And in terms of science, nobody would recommend doing a system like Ashtanga Yoga, because stretching to extension for 6 days of the week is not very good for you. And of course, if you are doing nothing, if you're just maybe jogging and lifting weights occasionally, practicing and doing something for 6 days a week and being a part of community and doing all this stuff is going to be better than nothing. But do you guys remember in 2020, speaking of cults, when everyone in Ashtanga was like, follow the science, we believe in the science. And I thought that was so funny because there is no scientific backing to doing Ashtanga yoga for meaningful results. Because, yes, if you sit and you do this Ashtanga system with an authorized teacher who's pressing you down and kicking off a sympathetic nervous response, you are going to get more flexible, you're going to get more strong. But if you ask someone, if you ask the professional, hey, I want to get more flexible, or I want to get more strong, or I want to have more endurance, or I want to do all three of those, the last thing that they would recommend is something like Ashtanga, because who's strong, flexible, and has a lot of endurance? What? Oh my God, Olympic gymnasts, calisthenic athletes, acrobats, all these types of people. And do they train in a similar way to Ashtanga? Do they do programs 6 days of the week without any contralateral movement, without any leg strength, without any pulling motions, without so many different things? And so if you are doing Ashtanga, if you believe that this is good for you, most likely you were anchored and programmed at some point to think that this is what you should be doing. And it's mostly from social reinforcements or because of the yogadelics, the progress you feel like you are making. And you connect that progress back to the original source. And Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga is a magnet for traumatized and fragmented individuals. Because I spent years in the Ashtanga yoga community, and I met more screwed up people there than anywhere else. I also met some really, really awesome people. And so instead of figuring out a personal system of individuation, it's easier to do shadow forms of an individuation with the cult. But that's what cults do. They blind you to what's really best for you, because we should be advocating for people to increase their mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual intelligence by whatever conscious means possible. And so if we run through that entire circuit really fast, emotionally, Ashtanga yoga is an exercise system, but does throw you into a flight or fight state. And guess what, you guys? There will be people down in the comments. I'm not ignorant. I understand that you can practice Ashtanga Vinyasa very slow and prevent yourself from going into that state. But why are we doing workarounds? In terms of physicality, what are your goals there? What are you trying to do? And I guarantee you that there are hundreds of better systems than Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga. So why aren't you doing those? Okay, in terms of intelligence, Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga isn't doing anything. Not that it needs to. It's a system of asana. And in terms of spirituality, what is it really doing? You get the fake yogadelic high, the Ashtanga glow. And when you look at Patabi Joyce's meditation philosophy, he almost never talked about it. And then when you look at their pranayama sequences, which are laid out, they are way too extreme. They have no progression. They have no real nuance to them. And there's no discussion on limbs 5 through 8 of Patanjali's system of yoga, which is where all real spirituality takes place. I understand that asana and pranayama are beautiful bedrocks because they can help you engage in longer breath retentions, which can help you visualize more. Like, it's a whole system that's connected, and I get it. But the system is wholly disconnected from those things. And when it does attempt to confront them, outright fails, because once again, if we go back to the axiomatic root of Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga and why it is successful in the Western mind, it is because it has an inherent competitive system within it, which is also inherent in cults. Because when you look at the progress, you show up in day one, even if you're really flexible, you have to go pose through pose. And if you're inflexible, you want to be the people who are in Series 2, Series 3, who are getting authorized. You want to be better. And so there is, especially in the orthodox system of Ashtanga, no props, no modifications. And you just have to figure it out as you go. And what's crazy, as someone who has taught Ashtanga and been in Ashtanga classes, is that once again, my teacher, Simon Borg Olivier, taught me this, that his school in Australia, Yoga Synergy, they collected data because they are scientists for a while about people coming into their studio. And people who were engaging in hard vinyasa classes, most of them quit yoga in its entirety. And they would call them and be like, hey, why'd you quit this? And they're like, it wasn't right for my body. And so there is a group of people who are hard chargers. Maybe they are traumatized. Maybe they are dancers. Maybe they are whoever, who come into the practice. And they are the 1%. And then when enough of them try it, they can create a group, and it makes it seem like this is actually good for the body and good for the everyday average individual. Because if you look at most other systems, the systems I was talking about that are way better in terms of physicality for endurance, flexibility, and strength, they have progressions from beginner to the highest extreme. To do that properly in Ashtanga yoga turns it into a circus with a million props and a million things and a million modifications. And I've been in those classes before with teachers doing that, and I applaud them for that. But it's basically using a screwdriver as a hammer. It works and it can make people healthier and, more flexible in this, but is it what's really most effective? And this is the question to ask to be able to pierce through cults, through any movement. Are you doing the most effective thing for your time? And we haven't even gotten into the crazy stuff yet. I'm still speaking to the people who think that practicing 6 days a week or following the Ashtanga Vinyasa system in a chill way is not ascribing to a cult. Because how are you not doing an extreme philosophical, spiritual, and religious ritual? Why is there chanting at the start? I'm not some ignorant randall. Why was there Sanskrit chanting at the start there? I bow to the lotus feet of the supreme guru. And I understand, guys, like I said, you're dealing with someone who's very open-minded. You're dealing with a killer right now. I understand the Western mind does not understand devotion, and we reject that. And being able to love, devote, and surrender yourself to something is a very necessary thing for all human beings to be able to do to access higher consciousness. But in retrospect, with what we have seen with Patabi Joyce and Sharat Joyce, did they deserve, for people to be touching their feet? Are those dudes actually saints? Because from what I've seen, and maybe I am wrong, maybe because I don't speak their native language, I don't know that they are the next Spinoza or the next Maharishi or whoever. But philosophically, I don't think that Patabi Joyce and Sharat had very much to say in comparison to some of the spiritual and philosophical greats of India. And if you would like to contend that, please in the comments down below say that Sharat and Patabi Joyce are in the top 10 of spiritual thinkers in the East. So what we are really touching their feet for is the yogadelics that we are receiving. And funny enough, the chant also evokes Patanjali, and Patabi Joyce bastardized his system of Ashtanga. It's funny because, there is Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, and Patabi Joyce was the person who broke through with that name, because that sounds like a pretty popular name. I'm doing Ashtanga Yoga. When people say that in the world, they mean Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga. Remember one time I was at an Indian food and I was talking to my waiter and he was like, "What kind of yoga you do?" I do Ashtanga yoga. And he had no idea who Patabi Joyce was. And he was from India. He's like, "Oh, like Patanjali's?" And I was like, "Oh my God." It's also interesting that in the opening chant, samsara is also mentioned, conditioned existence, because as Westerners, we have this need to confess. This is why many cults happen. This is why you see the stress sessions at with Jim Jones and obviously in China and many other places. But in the West, we have a confessional mindset. This is what people just love to tell everyone about their problems and everything. And so that also played into this, that at the root of Ashtanga, we have Patabi Joyce, who had very rough English his entire life, but I'm sure even at the start, it was even worse. And he was just drilling people with a hardcore system of physicality, almost like a David Goggins type figure, and then telling them that they were releasing samsaras, that they were attaining some form of spirituality through this experience. And this mirrors martial arts. I mean, this is the root of the East. This is the idea of the guru. The guru, most of the time, is the epitome of the cult. So to speak objectively, you are not eliminating samsaras and clearing yourself of anything unless you are engaging in limbs 4 through 8 of yoga, and really only limb 8. But pranayama can cleanse the brain. Pratyahara obviously is important for the next 2 limbs. I haven't even mentioned the sexual assault stuff yet, you guys. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. But this connects also to the inverting of meditation in the West, because the typical Ashtangi gets into it. They are yogadelic and out. They've blown their brains out. They're feeling it. They're seeing the social reinforcement. They're seeing progress in their body. But what they are doing is entering a more hypersuggestible state. And this is why the solo Ashtangi is also under duress, because limb number 6 of Ashtanga is dharana, which is concentration, which is being able to visualize the chakras and other things with a clear vision for a long time. And this is the ultimate purity. This is what Rodin told Rilke, and I'm talking about artists here. Yeah, one of the greatest sculptors of all time told one of the greatest poets of all time, who was a student back in the early 20th century, that he needed to go out into the world and look at animals in the zoo or pieces of art or nature for hundreds of hours with no other focus and just learn to see. And when you look at shamanic cultures, when you look at this limb of yoga, that's what they are talking about. That's what the vision quest is. That, there's a great book called Becoming Animal by David Abram, and he talks about being trained in shamanism and having to look at just like a raven, just go sit where the ravens are and stare at them for months. And eventually he learned to see the raven without any bias and connect with it completely outside of human consciousness, to have a pure vision. Because if you don't have that, then if you start to explore mindful meditation, Vipassana meditation, which everyone does initially and never really gets back to this. And when they do get back to like chakra visualizations, they're doing like weird Kundalini stuff, like the Kundalini cult. But if you're just being mindful all the time, you're actually not mystically changing yourself. You're not seeing reality better, which changes who you are. Because when you see reality for what it is, that becomes a referent for you to perceive with your own consciousness that reality and then change your own life. And before you also get into the collective unconscious, you have to be individuated. This is why Carl Jung prescribed active imagination, among many other things, because he knew that that was more important, to have the internal world, to have your sight aligned before you start meditating. Because if you read, I wish I can, I've talked about this in other videos and read quotes, but many of the ancient yogic texts would talk about why you have to do dharana before dhyana, or you will become a monster. Not a monster, I should say, but how it's not effective at all. And so when we think about the typical person who is trying to be more mindful and they're getting the yogadelics and they feel like they are making progress, they are becoming more relaxed, maybe on the outside level, maybe the false self, to speak in Freudian terms, has changed, but the inner self, the true self, how they would react with a little bit of stress when everything is stripped away, that has not changed. And that is what we should, not to get dogmatic here, but that's what I think that yoga is for. I think that that's the purpose in Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga. And that's what I think the purpose of doing a movement-based practice with Bandha breath and drishti is, that it will open you up to having a better pranayama practice, which will help you have a better dharana practice and thus be able to access some of the deeper samadhi meditations. And so I get it, but why not do that system with something that is more effective in every single realm and has none of the baggage? Why be into Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga except that you have been sold into it? Because we love personas. We see everyone doing it. We see Laruga and Kino and all the big figures, whoever your favorite Ashtangi is, doing this style of yoga. And they're normal people. I've met many of them. They're chill people, And your own sequence, your own path, whatever that is, has none of that. You are out in the dark. And it is hard. It's hard to stay accountable. You're going to make mistakes. But now I would like to talk about some of the blindness in the Ashtanga yoga community. And this is, hopefully what I talked about is more objective for some of you guys. And I hope I spoke to the solo Ashtanga yogis out there. But now I'd like to talk about a little bit more anecdotal and subjective stuff, which is some of the blindness in the Ashtanga yoga community. Because when I first got into Ashtanga, like I said, I went to a class and I was like, wow, this is cool. And I looked it up and I was reading about Pattabhi Jois. And then I fell upon, because it was 2014, 2015, Keno McGregor, Mark Roberts, all those people. And I immediately knew, because I have family that is very religious and I've studied cults before, that the language they were using to describe Pattabhi Jois, the way they were acting, that was blind, that they were spots that they were turning themselves off to truth, turning themselves off to power and to love and many other things in their life, that they had the blinders on. And when there was a hard question or when they were in an interview and the logical conclusion was, I don't really need to be doing this, they would reverse course. And I was like, wow, something's wrong here. And I immediately looked it up. And in 2014, there was a treasure trove already of information talking about Pattabhi Jois's sexual assaults. Online accounts on forums from people who saw the adjustments, people who had posted the photos. Karen Rain, who was the big kind of person in 2018, had already spoken at length about her entire experience with the Jois family. Everything that was most of the stuff that came out in 2018 everyone freaked out about was already there. And when I read that, I felt like I objectively believe, I was like, yeah, this is weird. Why are there these photos? Like, this guy does seem kind of creepy. And I'm someone personally who is a little bit more on the hesitant side of canceling people until I've seen at least some form of evidence. And with that, it was pure anecdotal, but intuitively, I was like, yeah, something seems a little weird here. Then when I started to pry into it, then when I saw Pattabhi and Sharath Jois's commercialization of the business, when I saw the gold chains, when I saw beautiful women kissing their feet. And I don't know where you guys are from, but in my neck of the woods, in Wyoming and Arizona, and in the mind at the university, when women kiss a man's feet, at its core, it's a very sexual and submissive thing to do, especially someone who isn't a real guru. That dude was not like, this dude isn't the guy out in the mountains or at the shala, at the temple, hidden away. This is a guy who's boasting his money, boasting his power, boasting his reputation. And this is never really talked about, but the Joyce family did try to copyright Ashtanga Yoga. Same with Bikram. There was a push in the 2000s to copyright these sequences, and they would love to have done that. Love to have the stranglehold, because if you look, okay, so now you guys can think of what you want about that, but the language that Ashtangis use, and a good way to research this, you guys, and it sucks that Sharath is dead now, but all these posts still exist. Go to the Instagram accounts of people who go to the Sharath Joyce, or went, I should say, to the Sharath Joyce seminars or meetings, people meeting him for the first time and sitting with their Guruji. Look at their language. And then, I'm asking you to judge people here. Yes, we are judging people, and it's a rough business. Obviously, we have to make generalizations, and not everything is perfect. But this is how you push back against cults. This is how, and yet people will say, why are you being negative? Why do you need to do this? Because it's good to think critically at times about this, especially spiritual systems that you are getting into. Because I hate logic pros. I hate viewing everything logically. Like I said, I know the power of being able to give into something. But look how they talk. Look how they act. For a man in Sharath Joyce, who, like I said, I don't think, to my knowledge, has really added anything philosophically, spiritually, that is groundbreaking, or is even like synthesizing anything. I don't hear him discussing this person and that person and combining it all together into some new form of yoga. All he did was open a new center and corporatize it more. Among also, which never gets talked about, him doing those adjustments. Sharath Joyce was there for most of those adjustments that his grandfather, I should say, did on those women, and only addressed it in a conference talk and said, oh yeah, this happened. And I'm not, like I said, he doesn't need to give a whole Instagram post and disavow his family. I understand loyalty, respect, especially over there. I get it. But how did he double down? Well, he doubled down on removing, and so let's get to it now. How do you get officially authorized by the lineage to teach Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga? Well, you have to fly out to Mysore. You have to wake up very early, and you have to engage in the ritual. You have to engage with people giving you harsh adjustments. And this is the penultimate, the pinnacle, the transcendental signified of the movement. Oh my God, I'm on fire right now. 2017, Ian that made videos on yoga, I was trying to explain all this, but I wasn't there yet. And you have to go year after year to receive an authorization. And I've met many and have practiced under authorized teachers before. But Sharath removing Mark Roberts and others showed the tyranny of his vision, showed what his reformation was going to be. And it was going to be further worship and more of the same. And I understand that he would do photos doing pull-ups or do some weightlifting or something every once in a while and act different. But in actuality, it was just commodifying and normalizing the system and distancing it through corporate tactics away from what Pattabhi Joyce had done. So there is a policy that holds people into the system, and there is a monetary incentive. And that's the other thing that has started to happen, that if you get authorized, then you could be on the list, then you can open up a school and people will show up. If you are an authorized teacher in, let's say, Seattle, Washington, or Knoxville, Tennessee, then people will look it up. I remember that's where I went. I was like, authorized teacher in my town, and I went to that person. And I will also acknowledge that their system and that authorized teachers in general have a high degree of proficiency in the practice, because there is a very high standard of achievement over there. But with money comes status and worship, and even more, and a system that people don't feel like they can escape from. And so if we're not already there, like anyone who's still in this, it's like, wait, why would you still be doing this? Other than for a motive that is because of personal weakness or malignant gain in your heart. And if you aren't an emotional reactionary and you are an Ashtangi, I don't think lesser of you. I've been sucked into things before and will get sucked into more things again in the future. But what is your reasoning? After hearing all of this, I would like you to address a few things. Do you feel that you've been socially conditioned to believe that this is good for you? And how would you answer to me saying that that is being reinforced by the hypersuggestible state that you were put in by activating your sympathetic nervous system? And two, how do you grapple with all the other stuff? The linguistic idiosyncrasies, the corruption and commodification of the system through the Joyce family, this sexual stuff. All of that. How do you guys grapple with all of that when you could find something else that is more physically beneficial for you and has none of the baggage and is purely adapted for you? And so this is Yogadelics, everyone. I talk about yoga philosophy from different perspectives. I am not scared to infuse and synthesize yoga with some of the greatest philosophers in the world, and you will be seeing more of that on this channel. And if you look back in the past, I have some good stuff, but I'm hoping to release more bangers like this all of the time. And of course, if you're interested in that, subscribe. You can leave a rage comment down below. I'd love to hear it. And my final parting words are quit your cult.